What does it really take to get under the skin of the smoothest man in hip-hop? Slick Rick made his name with effortless storytelling and a cool charm that no one could touch. But behind the flashy chains and laid-back rhymes, the world he ruled was full of tension. Backstabbing, broken promises, and battles for the throne were the reality of his era. We've all heard the gossip and the whispers, but never from Rick himself. So, who crossed the line? Who betrayed his trust? And which rivals pushed him too far? Here are 5 artists Slick Rick hated the most. Starting at number 5, we have Doug E. Fresh. Before Slick Rick became the ruler, he was a gifted teenager from the Bronx named Ricky Walters with an English accent, a love for fashion, and an incredible talent for telling stories. His journey to becoming a hip-hop legend didn't start alone. It began with one of the most innovative and dynamic partnerships of the era, alongside the original human beatbox, Doug E. Fresh. Their meeting was a matter of pure chance. They were introduced by a mutual friend in Harlem in the early 1980s. Doug E. Fresh was already a known talent, famous for his astonishing ability to create complex drum patterns, bass lines, and sound effects with just his mouth. Slick Rick, then known as MC Ricky D, impressed Doug with his smooth, narrative-driven rhymes and charismatic personality. They instantly clicked, and the Get Fresh crew was born. Their chemistry was undeniable and groundbreaking. At the time, hip-hop was dominated by the DJ-MC duo. The Get Fresh crew offered something different, a masterful storyteller paired with a human orchestra. This partnership reached its peak in 1985 when they recorded 2 of the most iconic songs in music history on a single 12-inch record, The Show on the A-side and La Di Da Di on the B-side. The Show was an electrifying, fun track that showcased their back-and-forth dynamic perfectly, but it was La Di Da Di that cemented their legacy. The track was pure hip-hop minimalism, just Slick Rick's voice weaving an intricate, humorous, and vivid story over Doug E. Fresh's simple but infectious beatbox rhythm. It was a masterpiece of storytelling that would go on to be sampled and referenced by hundreds of artists, from the notorious B.I.G. and Snoop Dogg to Miley Cyrus. The record was a massive hit and made them stars. However, the partnership that burned so brightly also faded quickly. After the success of their hit singles, the group began to drift apart. For years, rumors swirled about a bitter feud between them, with fans speculating about arguments over money, creative control, and fame. The truth, according to both men in later interviews, was far less dramatic and more rooted in the realities of being young in a rapidly growing industry. There wasn't a single, explosive event that ended the Get Fresh crew. Instead, it was a gradual separation fueled by different ambitions. Slick Rick, with his unique style and incredible storytelling talent, was destined to be a solo star. He had a vision for a full album that would become The Great Adventures of Slick Rick, and he wanted the creative freedom to see it through. In 2012, Doug E. Fresh sat down for an interview on Sway in the Morning. As always, Sway knew how to ask the right questions, and he pressed Doug to finally speak on what really happened between him and Slick Rick. At first, Doug was a little hesitant to answer, but eventually, he opened up.
There's things that occur when you're young that you don't understand.
He admitted that ego and emotions played a big role in their split.
Ego involved, there's emotions involved.
It wasn't about hate or betrayal. It was just the kind of tension that happens when you're young and trying to make your way in a tough business. Doug explained, "It wasn't a beef. We were young and a lot of people got in our ear. The love was always there." He made it clear that outside voices and the pressure of the industry pushed them apart more than anything else. To him, it wasn't personal, just a natural part of growing up in the music world. Slick Rick has always agreed with that view. He said many times that there was never a real beef between them. For him, going solo was simply the next step for his career and his vision as an artist. They were 2 young men from different boroughs, each with his own crew and his own dreams. Once contracts, money, and business came into play, the distance between them just happened. The idea of a feud was largely fueled by the public and the media, who found the story of a falling out more exciting. There were no diss tracks. There were no public confrontations or social media battles, the platforms for which didn't exist then. Their beef was one of silence and distance, not open conflict. In the years since, any lingering tension has completely dissolved. They have reunited on stage multiple times to perform their classic hits, bringing joy to fans who thought they'd never see them together again. At the 2016 BET Hip Hop Awards, they performed La Di Da Di together, showing a genuine warmth and respect for one another. At number 4, we have Run DMC. As Slick Rick and Dougie Fresh were changing the sound of Harlem and the Bronx, a full-blown revolution was already underway just across the bridge in Hollis, Queens. This movement was led by Run DMC, a trio that completely shattered the public's perception of what hip-hop could be. Comprised of Joseph Run, Simmons, Daryl DMC McDaniels, and the indispensable Jason Jam Master J Mazel on the turntables, they were not just a group, they were a global force. Unlike the more playful and melodic style that Slick Rick was pioneering, Run DMC's sound was raw, loud, and aggressive. They famously fused hard rock guitar riffs with booming drum machines, creating anthems like King of Rock and Rockbox. They dressed in black leather, fedoras, and unlaced Adidas sneakers, creating a powerful, streetwise image that became the uniform for a generation. By the time Slick Rick's The Show became a hit in 1985, Run DMC were already international superstars, the undisputed kings of the genre. Given this context, the relationship between Slick Rick and Run DMC was not one of personal animosity or direct conflict. There was no feud in the way people often think of rap battles. The dynamic was more about occupying different, powerful spaces within the same small world. They were contemporaries representing two distinct and contrasting styles of New York hip-hop. If Run DMC was the powerful shout that broke down walls, Slick Rick was the smooth, intricate story whispered in your ear that you could never forget. There are no records of diss tracks, public confrontations, or negative interview comments between them. The battle was an artistic one, fought on the radio waves and in the record stores. It was a competition for influence and for the title of the most creative and impactful artist of the era. Jam Master Jay, as the musical architect of Run DMC, was central to this dynamic. He was a master of the stripped-down, hard-hitting beat. His style of using precise, heavy-hitting scratches and rock loops was the sonic backbone of their power. This stood in stark contrast to the slick, more funk and reggae-infused production that would later define Slick Rick's solo album, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick. They simply represented different philosophies of what a hip-hop track should sound like. Slick Rick has spoken about the era with respect for what Run DMC accomplished. In interviews, he has acknowledged their monumental role in paving the way for all the artists who came after them, including himself. He understood that the doors they kicked open made it possible for his own unique brand of artistry to find a mainstream audience. Essentially, their relationship is a perfect example of how competition in hip-hop isn't always about personal beef. It was about coexisting titans defining an era from different angles. Run DMC built the stadium, and artists like Slick Rick stepped onto the stage they helped create, captivating the audience with a completely different kind of show. There was no hatred, only a shared space where different forms of greatness were being forged simultaneously. Moving on to number 3, we have Rick Rubin. While artists were battling for lyrical supremacy on the streets and on stage, much of the sound of that era was being shaped behind the scenes by one man, Rick Rubin. With his long beard and laid-back demeanor, Rubin was the polar opposite of the flashy artists he produced, yet his influence was just as powerful. As the co-founder of Def Jam Recordings alongside Russell Simmons, he wasn't just a producer, he was an architect of modern hip-hop. Rubin's connection to our story begins with Run DMC. While they had already established their sound, it was Rubin's production on their 1986 masterpiece, Raising Hell, that turned them into global icon. He stripped their music down to its most powerful elements, bone-crushing drum machines, and loud, raw rock guitars. His famous production on Walk This Way with Aerosmith didn't just create a hit song, it shattered the wall between rock and rap forever, proving that hip-hop had limitless commercial potential. This raw, minimalist, and aggressive sound became the signature of Def Jam. Now, here's where Slick Rick's story directly intersects with Ruben's empire. After parting ways with Doug E. Fresh, Slick Rick signed as a solo artist to Def Jam Records. He was now on the same label as Run DMC, LL Cool J, and the Beastie Boys. On paper, it was a perfect match. The hottest new storyteller joining the most powerful label in music. However, there was a fundamental artistic difference. Slick Rick's vision for his music was not the stripped-down, hard rock aggression that was Rick Rubin's trademark. Rick was a storyteller who needed a different kind of canvas. His rhymes were smooth, detailed, and often humorous, requiring a more melodic and funk-infused backdrop. Because of this, Rick Rubin did not produce Slick Rick's iconic 1988 debut, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick. Instead, production was handled by the Bomb Squad, known for their dense, sample-heavy work with Public Enemy, Jam Master Jay, and Slick Rick himself. The result was an album that sounded completely unique. It had a lush, soulful, and almost cinematic quality that allowed Rick's narratives about characters like Lottie Dottie and the Ruler to come to life. It was a Def Jam release, but it didn't have the typical Def Jam sound. Their relationship was more professional than creative. Slick Rick respected Rubin as a label head who gave him a platform, but he maintained his own artistic control. The clash was one of style, not of personalities. Slick Rick knew the kind of music he wanted to make, and it simply wasn't the kind of music Rick Rubin was focused on creating at the time. In interviews years later, Slick Rick has never spoken negatively about Rubin. His issues with Def Jam came later, related to a lack of support during his long incarceration and disputes over royalties, issues many artists faced with record labels. But his relationship with Rubin himself is better understood as two powerful forces in the same orbit who respected each other's space. Rubin was building an empire on a specific sonic foundation, and Slick Rick built his own legendary castle right next to it, using a completely different set of tools. Big Daddy Kane is another artist Slick Rick once disliked. If the other relationships on this list were about collaboration, creative differences, or respectful competition, the dynamic between Slick Rick and Big Daddy Kane was a true head-to-head rivalry. In the late 1980s, these two men stood as lyrical titans, each with a legitimate claim to being the best MC in the world. They were the Ali and Frazier of hip-hop's golden age, two incredible talents with completely opposite styles destined to clash. Big Daddy Kane, from Brooklyn, was a lyrical machine. He was known for his complex, rapid-fire rhymes, aggressive delivery, and charismatic stage presence. He was the master of battle rap, able to dismantle opponents with intricate wordplay. His hits like Ain't No Half Steppin' and Raw were displays of pure lyrical athleticism. Slick Rick, on the other hand, was the master storyteller. He was smooth, witty, and fashionable, with a relaxed, melodic flow. He didn't overpower you with speed. He captivated you with his detailed narratives and laid-back charm. This contrast created a natural and fierce competition that defined the era. The question on every fan's mind was, who was better? This rivalry, however, didn't stay on wax. It boiled over into a real-life confrontation that has become a legendary and cautionary tale in hip-hop history. The conflict reached its peak during a tour in Virginia. Both Slick Rick and Big Daddy Kane were headliners, and an argument broke out over who would get the top billing, the coveted final performance slot of the night. In hip-hop, performing last is a sign of ultimate respect and status. So this was no small matter. Accounts of that night, most notably from Big Daddy Kane's own DJ, Mr. C, detail how the argument escalated quickly. It moved from a verbal dispute to a physical fight between members of their respective crews. In the heat of the moment, the unthinkable happened. According to Big Daddy Kane, who has recounted the story in multiple interviews, including on VLAD TV and the Drink Champs podcast, Slick Rick pulled out a gun.
I had beef and Slick Rick pulled out a gun and tried to shoot you. Is this true?
There may be a little truth to that.
He explained that he managed to de-escalate the situation by talking to Rick, asking him if it was really worth throwing their careers away over a performance slot. Thankfully, the situation cooled down without a being fired, but the incident drew a line in the sand. This was no longer just a lyrical competition, it had become dangerously personal. For years after, there was a palpable tension between them. They were the two kings of their era, but they moved in separate circles. However, as time passed and they both matured into elder statesmen of the genre, their relationship evolved from bitter rivalry to one of deep mutual respect. They have since put the past completely behind them. Kane has praised Slick Rick's artistry, acknowledging him as one of the greatest storytellers of all time. They have even appeared on stage together, a sight many fans thought they would never see. Their story serves as the ultimate example of a hip-hop feud, a clash of titans born from competition, which escalated to a dangerous peak and eventually settled into a respectful peace. It remains the most intense and personal conflict Slick Rick ever had with another artist. At the top of our list, we have Russell Simmons. The relationship between Slick Rick and Russell Simmons is one of the most compelling and cautionary tales in music history. It wasn't a rivalry over rhymes or stage presence like his feud with Big Daddy Kane. Instead, it was a deep, long-standing rift between an artist and the executive who ran his label, a conflict rooted in loyalty, money, and a profound sense of betrayal during the darkest moment of Rick's life. When Slick Rick signed to Def Jam Records, it was a golden ticket. Russell Simmons, alongside his partner Rick Rubin, had built the most powerful and culturally significant label in hip-hop. Simmons was the ultimate visionary and dealmaker. He understood how to market hip-hop to the world, turning his artists into superstars. The partnership seemed perfect. In 1988, they released The Great Adventures of Slick Rick, an album that was a creative and commercial masterpiece. It sold millions, cementing Rick's status as a top-tier artist and making a fortune for Def Jam. Slick Rick was one of the label's most prized assets. Then, everything fell apart. In 1990, Rick was involved in the shooting of his cousin and former bodyguard, who he claimed had been extorting him. He was arrested, and in 1991, he was sentenced to prison. This is where the story turns, and where the feud with Russell Simmons truly begins. While Slick Rick was incarcerated, his album continued to fly off the shelves. He was a rap superstar behind bars, but he felt completely abandoned by the man and the label that were profiting from his name. In numerous interviews over the years, Slick Rick has detailed his feelings of neglect. He explained that while he was fighting for his freedom and his life, the support he expected from his label boss simply wasn't there. He believed that Def Jam, and Russell specifically, should have done more to help with his astronomical legal fees. More painfully, he felt he wasn't receiving the royalties he was rightfully owed from his massively selling album. From his perspective, the label was content to let him languish in prison while his music continued to generate wealth for them. The sense of abandonment was made even sharper by the actions of others. Rick has famously told the story of how Suge Knight, the controversial head of Death Row Records, reached out to him in prison. Suge offered to buy out his contract and provide him with the high-powered legal team he needed. While Rick ultimately declined, the gesture highlighted the silence he felt from his own camp. The fact that a rival label head showed more concern than his own was a source of deep hurt. From Russell Simmons' perspective, it was a matter of business. He was running a large corporation with a roster of demanding artists. In his view, the label fulfilled its contractual obligations. In the cold, hard world of the music industry, personal crises, even ones as severe as Rick's, were often seen as the artist's own problem to manage. Simmons has never been accused of breaking a contract, but the criticism has always been about a lack of personal loyalty and human compassion that went beyond the written word. There was never a public shouting match, no diss tracks, and no social media drama. The tension between Slick Rick and Russell Simmons was much quieter, but it grew slowly over the years. While Rick was out on a short work release program, he recorded 2 albums for Def Jam, The Ruler's Back 1991 and Behind Bars 1994. Many fans and critics felt these projects were rushed and didn't get the proper promotion. To them, it seemed like the label was more interested in making quick money off Rick's situation than giving him the chance for a real artistic comeback. At its core, their conflict was a classic battle between art and business. Rick was an artist who poured his heart into timeless music and expected loyalty when he needed it most. Russell, on the other hand, was a businessman focused on contracts, numbers, and profit. Even though the two have been spotted together at events over the years, the damage was already done. For Rick, the sense of abandonment during one of the hardest moments of his life left a wound that never fully healed. So, after hearing Slick Rick's side of the story and seeing the rivalries that shaped his journey, what do you think? Is there another artist you believe could have made his list? Or maybe a moment in hip-hop history that you feel would have pushed the ruler over the edge? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know who you think might have tested Slick Rick's patience and why.